Almost every single year on the AP exam, there is a question or an FRQ and at least a multiple choice question or two about the relationship between the president and Congress. And this relationship is really a relationship that is about a struggle for political power. The president was supposed to be a check on Congress, but as the president became more powerful, the Congress has tried to check him. And really dependent upon whether or not we are in a situation of divided government or we are in a situation where the president has majority political party advantage in Congress is going to depend on how contentious the relationship is between the executive and the legislative branch. Very important stuff. It is going to seem like a lot of review. It is a lot of review. But I want you to look at all of the powers that the president has through this political struggle between him and the U.S. Congress. It's always good to understand and make sure you have the constitutional responsibilities of the president. He is commander-in-chief of the military. He is chief administrator and heading executive branch, making sure that laws are enforced. He's responsible for negotiating treaties and being the head diplomat. In the State of the Union address, he has to allow Congress a heads up about how things are going with the execution of laws, and he also uses this as a situation to propose policy agenda. And he makes appointments, from everything from the cabinet appointments to senior executive officers of the bureaucracy and judicial appointments. Remember, he has informal roles, and these informal roles have become more important. Managing a crisis, recruiting his White House staff and executive and members of the executive office of the president, building national morale, and his job as chief legislator. So these you will not find in the Constitution per se, but rather these are the powers and responsibilities the president has acquired as he is, as the office has evolved and him having more power. Federalist Paper 70. I always think this is ironic because in this paper, Alexander Hamilton argues about why we shouldn't be scared of a president becoming too powerful. And he's specifically addressing the question of whether or not we should have a plural executive or more than one president. And he says that really you can't have a plural executive. Having more than one president is going to allow for the concealing of faults and destroying the responsibility. He's destroying the responsibility of the office. So if you have two people and one person's really good at economic policy and the other person's really good at foreign policy, well, whereas the one president may be weak in foreign policy, he can hide behind his knowledge of economic policy, so on and so forth. So it allows you to conceal any weakness you might have. A singular president would be better suited to wield the full potential of power in a quick and efficient way. So you don't have to worry about two people disagreeing of what to do about bombing a country when you're attacked. You don't have to worry about two people squabbling or bickering about how to solve a domestic crisis, or what you do after a natural disaster. Alexander Hamilton also says that there's always going to be a difference of opinion. If you do have plural executives, even if they're from the same party, just because by nature they're different people, they're going to have a difference of opinion. A strong, energetic executive branch requires unity and the ability to have time to do your job well, and good executive branch is going to have a lot of power and resources to carry out their functions. Besides, if there is one powerful guy, supposedly there will be a more powerful Congress to check his power. But the power of the presidency has dominated Congress in 5 main areas. And we're going to cover these main areas: war, legislation, budget, appointments, and treaties. And in order for the president to have acquired more power since its conception in 1787, they are going to have to take that power away from Congress. And this is depicted in this cartoon. Now you see this big nose, that's supposedly Nixon. So that's 3 cartoon Nixons. And you have executive privilege, veto power, and I think that says impoundment of funds. And this is supposed to be a congressperson. And you have these Nixon bullies pushing this congressperson in the way that he wants them to go. So I'm going to cover war powers first. Of course, the president's commander-in-chief. That means the president gets to deploy troops, and when the war is said and done, they get to negotiate treaties. Now, which power does Congress have over war? Right, they get to declare war. They get to ratify those treaties, and they get to appropriate the money that it's going to take to deploy troops and conduct a military operation. They also maintain the military. So, it takes both houses to declare war. It takes the Senate to ratify a treaty. And remember, appropriating money begins in the House of Representatives. So if the president gets us into a conflict Congress doesn't agree with, then they are the ones that supposedly can declare war or not declare war and make us come home. If the president negotiates a treaty to end war that Congress doesn't agree with, again, Senate can decide not to ratify it. And if Congress doesn't believe in the war expenditures that are currently being spent by the president as commander-in-chief, then they can just cut off funds, which is very politically risky. Congress very rarely will check the president's power of war by denying funds to the military. By denying funds to the military, Congress isn't just hurting the president, they're also hurting the troops who really have no control over their situation. I mean, they've been told to go to war, and it can be political suicide to try to cut money for war. So, the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution is an example of when Congress has handed over their power of war. President Johnson persuaded Congress to enact this resolution, and this was in retaliation for the American destroyers that were attacked in the Gulf of Tonkin in northern Vietnam before the full-fledged Vietnam conflict. So President Johnson convinces Congress to give him a blank check. Congress then allows the president to be a commander-in-chief and deploy troops without formally declaring war, and the Congress said that they would give him an endless amount of money necessary in order to squash the Vietnam problem. So in general, what you will find is that Congress tends to bequeath power to the president over war or any foreign policy situations, because Congress really does put a lot of trust and responsibility on the president's shoulders when it comes to foreign policy. And this was the case until the War Powers Resolution. During the Nixon administration, Congress passes the War Powers Act. It is important to know the provisions within the War Powers Act. First, if the president deploys troops, he must go and give a congressional statement. So he has to go to Congress and he has to notify them why they are there, and he has to do this within 48 hours of deploying the troops. President has to consult with Congress when possible, so he can't just leave the troops abroad or leave the troops in military action without giving Congress information about how the operation is going. His a limited number of days that he can be abroad without a formal declaration of war, and he can have the troops abroad for 60 days. Now, Congress did say they can extend the time or withdraw the troops. So if Congress feels like maybe this operation needs 2 more weeks, maybe the operation needs up to 90 days to be successful, that's Congress's decision. They get to extend the time. The point of War Powers Act. Congress wants to reassert its authority. So you have a picture here of Nixon War Powers Bill passed. Okay, so and these are his political lackeys, and they're he's asking his political lackeys, how could Congress do this? How could Congress take away my right to conduct unconstitutional war? That's unconstitutional. Well, there's irony in that because he shouldn't have had a blank check to conduct a conflict. Congress just was asking to reassert their authority to declare war. Nixon, of course, did veto the bill. Congress overrides the veto, and so remember it takes 2/3 of Congress to override a veto, and since the overriding of the veto, Congress Congress was able to make sure that they still have powers to declare war. The legislative veto, this is one thing that Congress tried to use to rein in even more power from the president. A legislative veto is a resolution that is passed by one or both houses of the legislative branch, and it's intended to nullify an administrative regulation or an action like sending troops abroad. So, just like in the War Powers Act, Congress tries to reassert its authority. Congress tried to do this with the legislative veto and say if the president wants to conduct a conflict or deploy troops, we'll just pass a resolution that nullifies or says that action can't happen. But the legislative veto was overridden by Supreme Court or declared unconstitutional. And when all else fails, one thing that Congress can do is use legislative powers. Okay, so that's where we're going to start, and we'll pick up legislative powers in the next video.